Division versus unity. In this episode, we're going to talk about the engine that drives all of reality. This is it. The engine is division and unity, and we're going to explore this through a long list of examples, because really everything in life that you see is an example of this, and it'll be amazing when you see this high-level pattern that I'm about to show you, how all of reality is going to suddenly start to make sense. Have you ever wondered what's really going on here in life? Like, is there some sort of reason, rhyme or reason to it? Or is stuff just happening accidentally? Is there a purpose, a point, a goal? Is it just a thing that's out of control? Or is there some logic to the mechanism? And of course, what you see is that there's some logic to the mechanism. It's a very high order of logic. It's a logic beyond mere human logic. See, all of reality is an interplay between division and reunion. That is what's happening. Everything is about this. This includes the social human levels that we're talking about. It includes relationships. It includes your personal life and what's going on with you. It includes your birth and death. But even aside from all that human stuff, it includes what's happening with biology, with chemistry, with physics, and even beyond all that. It's really profound when you start to see how this shapes everything that's happening in your life at a practical level. It really puts everything into context. It allows you to take a step back and to see kind of like, what is the rhyme and reason of reality? And then you also see how ingenious it is too. It's not just a stupid process that's happening blindly, the way that many materialists or scientists fool themselves into believing. So we can start off by noticing that the history of mankind, if you are a student of history, is a series of divisions and reunions, and it unfolds like a fractal. All of reality unfolds like a fractal. Divisions within divisions, reunions within reunions. Consciousness polarizes and depolarizes. It expands and it contracts back. It diverges and then it reconverges. And it keeps doing this forever, eternally. And that is the dance of consciousness or infinite mind. So let's start to get into some of these examples. Very common everyday examples, for example, the hydrologic cycle. Have you noticed how water works on this planet that we're on? Pretty important resource, water. But how does it really work? Well, basically we could say that it starts in the ocean, a giant puddle of water. That's what the ocean is. And then that evaporates through heating. So it starts being unified as a unified body, giant body of water. Then it heats, evaporates. As it does so, of course, all the little particles, they separate from the puddle. They rise into the atmosphere, and now they're suspended in the atmosphere, and they form clouds. Of course, the clouds are individualized, divided from each other. And some clouds then reunite, forming bigger clouds. Eventually, when enough clouds unite, enough of the divided clouds unite, there's enough reunion going on that you get a giant column of cloud of these water particles. And then from that union, now we get a precipitation, literally precipitation. The union divides itself into individual rain droplets, millions and billions and trillions of them, and of course they all fall down. And then what happens? They form individual puddles, but then those puddles, they get large enough, they're divided puddles. Then they get larger, and then they start to merge together into larger puddles, streams, rivers. Then those little rivers run together to form larger rivers, so the division reunites even further, goes all the way down the land until it all reconverges and reunites back to its source, which is the ocean. Or maybe it gets locked somewhere underground, or it gets locked in some sort of lake. But eventually all of that will also evaporate, and at some point it'll all remerge back with the ocean. See? Pretty cool how that works, right? Pretty profound, actually, when you think about it. Something so simple like rain, you never thought about it being an example of division and reunion. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Think about, for example, a very common case. Let's say you make a morning smoothie. Maybe you watched my video about my super blueberry smoothie. If you're making one of those, let's say, for your morning meal, that's a great example of division and reunion. So how does your smoothie get made? Well, it starts off as just elements, earth, water, and the sun, basically. Then what happens? Well, over a long period of time, those elements, they grow into plants, trees, fruit trees. That's what you're putting in your smoothie. So you've got plants growing, individual plants, so the plants have to divide. So first of all, to get a plant at all, one plant, that plant has to unify separate elements of earth, water, sunlight. Of course, the earth is composed of a bunch of different elements, but we're just calling it earth for simplicity, or the soil. You know, it has to unify those, arrange those in some sort of unified structure, which is the plant. That plant then can bear fruit. Of course, the fruits now individuate on the plant because one plant can have many fruits. And what is a fruit really but just a division of a plant? Literally, the fruit contains partial DNA, fragmented, divided DNA of the plant, because these fruits are used to then reproduce other plants. You know, the fruits have to be pollinated, so forth. DNA combines to create a whole new plant. But then, you know, your smoothie has multiple different fruits. so at some point in evolutionary past, there was a proliferation of different species of plants. Humans divided fruits. They grew different types of apples, if you're putting apples into your smoothie, or they grew different species or varieties of blueberries if you're putting those in your smoothie. Different varieties of bananas got bred and genetically modified, or whatever they did to them to get different species of them. So that created a proliferation of different kinds of fruits. Then, of course, those are picked. Then some supermarket has to aggregate all the fruits, because you got to go to one supermarket to find all the fruits for your smoothie. That's usually what you do. So a lot of work and effort was put in by the supermarket to get supply chains of all the different fruits that you might want for your smoothie. You go there, you pick them all out, put them in one unified basket, take them all home, then you chop them up, and then you throw them into your blender, and then your blender literally takes them, divides them into little pieces, but then all those pieces get blended together and reunited into your smoothie. And then you drink this smoothie. And then furthermore, it doesn't end there. What happens, your body further now, it has to do the opposite of what you did. The blender unified all the little bits of fruit together. But now your body has to undo that process by chemically digesting all the fruit pieces and breaking them down, subdividing those further into individual molecules and proteins that your body can then use. Those nutrients, minerals, and vitamins and so forth can then use those to nourish the cells in your body. Of course, what are the cells in your body but subdivisions within your body? Each cell has its own requirements and needs. And all those divided cells then work together in coordination as a unit to create the body and to create a sense of you, a sense of separate self that you have, your ego mind. See? And then, of course, your body is just a division within consciousness. So you see the general pattern here? This is what life is doing at all levels. Up and down the chain, it's doing this. At microscopic levels and at macroscopic cosmic levels, it's doing this. Consciousness, and this is consciousness, it's polarizing and depolarizing. It's diverging and reconverging and doing this over and over and over again, because there's nothing else for consciousness to do but this. And it's doing this in infinite variety, in infinite situations, with infinite intricateness and sophistication. And it's producing all of this amazing stuff, from televisions to trees to fruit smoothies to children to animals and everything else. Species are a great example, because species proliferate and go through, actually, it's called a process of speciation. you start off with one species, but then usually that species is living in some geographical area, but then something happens, the geology changes, a mountain range occurs, a new forest grows, a new lake forms, which then divides. Let's say a mountain range, arises, which divides what was one unified species now into two species. And, at first they're one species just divided into two geographical areas, but then over time, because the geography is going to change, the two areas are not going to have the same geography. Let's say this area gets more rain than the other area. So this is dry, this is wet. And so the species now have to change to adapt to the dry or the wet environment. And then over millennia, you get totally different species starting from one, you see. And that's a process of division. But of course, then what might happen is that over time, the wind erodes the mountain range. And the species now, there's a little canyon between the mountain range or somewhere. Now the species reconverge, they meet each other. If they can interbreed, they interbreed with each other. And now some now unified new third species comes, some sort of hybrid from these two different ones who are still able, let's say, to interbreed because they're not that far apart yet. And then that third one is some new thing, which is, again, you divided and now you reunited them. And then, of course, that third species will go on and the same process will happen with it again. And through this process, we got all of life on this planet, all the variety from bacteria to fungi to plants to single-cell organisms, and then mammals, birds, and humans and primates. And then after we got humans, in Africa, they started to migrate out of Africa. That's the best theory I think we have so far. If you track the genetics, basically all human genes go back to somewhere in Africa. And so hundreds of thousands of years ago, maybe even 1 million years ago, humans, Homo sapiens, emerged from Africa and then started to proliferate. And we were basically one species and one race at that point. Started to proliferate into the Middle East, through Egypt, I assume, and then up from there through Europe and into Russia and into Asia and then into the Southeast Asia, into China, and then from there down into Polynesia and into Indonesia and to Australia even, and then all the way to Alaska, and then down through Alaska into the Americas and down into the South Americas. And then basically that happened. And then we got the different races. We got the Asian races, we got the African races, we got the white northern races, we got the Indian race, we got the Australian Aboriginal race, and we got the Indonesian races and all this. And for a long time, because there were so few humans and the planet relatively was so large relative to how few humans there were, that we could live in little pockets. It was very easy to just go off in the wilderness and start your own tribe. I mean, it wasn't easy. It was very difficult. But it was easy in the sense that you didn't have much competition. And so during this period, there was a proliferation of human races, cultures, and tribes, and civilizations. And then many of them became disconnected from each other. The Aboriginals never spoke with the Chinese, and the Chinese probably never spoke much with the Europeans for a long time. Until, they grew, each of these little pockets, they grew more and more and more to the point where now they became large civilizations with hundreds of thousands of people in each city, millions of people in one city. And then there was technology, there was trade, there were ships, there was commerce. And so slowly the Europeans and the Chinese started to do trade with each other. There was the Silk Route, and there was trade overseas, and eventually the Europeans came over to the Americas and started to do trade and started to interbreed. Of course, now you have interbreeding between different races. And so what happens? First, we had the division, which created the different races. Now we have the interbreeding and intermarriage between different races. And so now we get some sort of mix in between, white person, black person, they have a child, and the child is usually somewhere in the middle. Sometimes there's variance there, but usually the child is kind of half white, half black, or half Asian, half European, or half whatever. half European, half Native American. That's basically what the Mexicans are. And the South Americans. Spanish plus the original natives. And so through this now, of course, we get a reintegration, reunion, literally. And of course, we're still seeing it to this day. And we're not nearly done with this process. Because globalization is still happening right now. And if you think about it, if this process keeps going for thousands of years, as the globe becomes more interconnected, airplane travel becomes even faster and better. We get supersonic travel. Maybe we even built teleport machines that allow you to just teleport from one side of the globe to another side of the globe really quickly in an instant. What's this going to do? This is going to erase all of those old boundaries. You're not going to have Europeans and Australians living separately and Africans. We're all going to intermingle, and ultimately, really, there's going to be one race. We're all going to fuck each other and interbreed until you're not going to have black people and white people and brown people and yellow people. We're all going to be some lukewarm mix of all that. And then what? What are you going to do? All those boundaries were erased. But it's not going to end there because, of course, once we do fully unify, by that point, we're going to have space travel. We're going to send humans to different planets, maybe even to other solar systems. Maybe we build a teleportation device in some other solar system, and then we can travel there really fast. But if we do that, then there's going to be a new diversification. See, we're going to begin the whole process over again because some people are going to colonize Mars, some people are going to colonize the moon, some people colonize some other solar system. Of course, each of those will have different geography. And again, the process of speciation will begin again. The people on Mars will, due to low gravity, will grow taller, their heads will grow bigger, whatever. The people on the moon something else will happen to them. People on some aquatic planet will grow flippers and fins and gills and whatever else. And then that will happen. And then, of course, after that happens, then we invent some sort of even faster and better traveling technology. We'll be able to get them to start to interbreed with each other. And then, of course, that's just humans. What about when humans start to encounter aliens? And then, of course, as soon as we start to encounter aliens, we're going to have sex with them. And then we're going to interbreed. Or even if we can't physically interbreed for whatever reasons, if our genetics are not similar enough to allow for viable offspring, which is probably likely, we could still get their DNA or they can get our DNA and we can do cloning. By that point, we'll be advanced enough to do cloning and we'll do advanced genetic engineering. And we can just take human genes and then alien genes and create some new hybrid creature. And then that will happen. And then we'll breed with it if we can. And so this process just is another example of divergence and convergence of consciousness. That's what this is. But notice that there's a problem when people don't understand that this is what's going on at a high level. They get attached to these boundaries. And they say, well, but my Indian culture is the best culture. I got to preserve my Indian culture. Or I got to preserve my American culture. Or my German culture. And then people fight to the death to preserve their German culture or whatever. See, or their race. And then people get scared over things like immigration or cultural appropriation. And they get offended by this, as though somehow it's unnatural for a white man and a black woman to have sex or something like that. I mean, literally, this is what people believed. 50 or 100 years ago, they would have told you, your parents would have told you that it's unnatural for you to get married with someone of a different race or of a different culture. In fact, your parents could still probably be telling you that. I bet for most of you, if you're a white woman and you try to get married to a black man, you bring home a black man, your parents are going to have a problem with it. Maybe. I mean, it depends how progressive your parents are, but many of them still will. See? And then people get really defensive about this. But what are you defending against? I mean, these divisions that have happened, they're not going to last. See, when you see this bigger pattern, when you understand what all of life and all of consciousness is doing, then you stop resisting the reunion. Otherwise, people act ignorantly and they somehow get offended by reunions happening. Or they can also get offended by divisions happening too. It's not as simple as reunion being good and division being bad. In fact, good and bad is a division, and they need to be reunited. You see, none of this is good or bad. All of it is the play of consciousness. See, just by using your mind to walk around the world and to judge things, that's good, this is bad. That's good, this is bad. That itself is the process of consciousness diverging and then converging. See? The way you were raised, most of us, in school and by your parents and by your peer group, they taught you how to judge. They taught you how to divide the world using your mind. And then by watching Actualized.org a lot, I teach you the opposite often. I teach you how to stop judging. I teach you how to see the interconnectedness of diverse things, divided things. We're using the mind to integrate things here with this teaching most of the time. Of course, we do some division as well, but mostly we're more interested in reunification. And so by the time you're done with this work here that we're doing, you start to reunite good and bad. And you stop looking at the world that way. And that's a different way to live life. And then your experience of life changes as a result of that. Usually it becomes better. How about war as a great example of unity and division? So again, we have two groups of people, two tribes that separate and isolate themselves. And at first there's peace because they're separate, they don't interact very much. But then as they both grow, they start to encroach on each other's territory. And they also start to see that, oh, those other guys, they have valuable resources that I might want. I might want to steal their land or steal their cattle or steal their women or whatever. I might want to enslave them and use them for labor. I might want to, steal their houses and live in their houses. And so then the two start to plot against each other. And this is division. Now we have a war. But what is a war? Really, a war is one group trying to absorb the other group. Usually a war is not about total eradication. Very rarely does one group of people just wish to completely eradicate the other group of people. Sometimes that happens, like in really toxic situations like with the Nazis. I think that was literally their intent, was to exterminate the Jews, not to absorb them. But in most other instances, it wasn't like that. And in fact, even the Nazis didn't have that intention towards other countries around them. Mostly they wanted to absorb other countries. Like they didn't go to France and try to exterminate all the French. No, they tried to basically absorb the French. But this absorption, what is that but reunion? To absorb is to reunite. Now, of course, then there's a question of who's absorbing who. But also it's very interesting because, see, if the Nazis actually did manage to go to France and to just so overwhelm the Europeans that they got a stranglehold over the whole continent militarily, and they were able to, create a 100-year reign of the Third Reich or whatever. And they started to assimilate the French. But see, it couldn't have been how Hitler fantasized it would be. It couldn't just be that all of Europe would be assimilated under the Nazi culture and all the Nazi Aryan ideals. It would also be that the Nazi ideals would be influenced by the French culture or the Polish culture or the Russian culture or whatever, they dominated. And so there would be a mutual reconnection of the two. It wouldn't simply just be that only the Nazi ideals and culture would dominate over everybody else. Now, I'm not saying they would have been equal. It depends. It's not always an equal reunion. Some parts can contribute more than other parts, but something new would have resulted from that. And that's, of course, one of the things that someone like Hitler doesn't really quite understand when he's hatching his grand plans for world domination. But usually the two sides, after a lot of fighting, neither side wins. Neither side is really happy with the war. Both sides suffer massive casualties and massive suffering. Then they realize the stupidity of their ways, and then they make a ceasefire and they create a truce, and there's an agreement. A peace is reached. And of course, this peace is usually under some larger unified banner. So after World War II, we got the European Union. We got the United Nations. These were higher, larger umbrella organizations where the Europeans realized that, hey, if we have a third world war, we're going to kill each other forever. So we better unite under a larger banner, recognize that all stakeholders here have a say. Everybody deserves to be heard. We got to work together, coordinate, because we got bigger fish to fry rather than fighting each other. And that's how it was historically. Small tribes had to band together through war. A lot of times they have to be conquered and dominated to unify them. So some big chieftain comes along, forcefully unifies the tribes. But why does he do that? It can seem like it's very oppressive and egotistical to do that, but there's an even deeper intelligence behind it, is that the unification is necessary because they have a common enemy who's an even bigger tribe somewhere, on another continent that at one point they'll have to face. So it's smart for the European nations to band together and create the EU because they got America to deal with, they got China to deal with, they got Russia to deal with. And so if they weren't united, they could easily be picked off and divided and conquered by one of those larger powers. See? So a lot of times the unity is necessitated by a common enemy. And for example, if aliens came to Earth tomorrow, Independence Day style, and started to attack us, if they were stupid, egotistical aliens, they started to attack us and they came in violence and not in peace and in love, then what would happen? All of the petty little disagreements that we have right now between China and Russia and Europe and Africa and America, these would all become irrelevant. At least for a while we're fighting off the aliens, because we have to unite as a species to fight off, because our survival, is so threatened that if we don't defeat these aliens, then none of us will be alive. So of course we're going to unite and we're going to fight those aliens. And let's say we defeat those aliens. Again, Independence Day style. It's a bit outlandish, but let's say we manage to do that. Okay, so we defeat the aliens. Now what? Now, we're united. We were divided. Now we're united. But in this reunion, we would start to again fight with each other, because now the common enemy is gone, and now we're going to get back to our petty squabbles, our petty little differences, and then we're going to divide ourselves again. See? Until some new aliens come, and then we're going to have to reunite again. That's what's going on. How about clan warfare in the Middle East? You got the Sunnis and the Shias fighting with each other. You have dictators like Saddam Hussein who try to unify these tribes into larger nation states. The Middle East is still a very, very tribal culture. Spiral dynamics stage purple in a lot of places in the Middle East. So they still have a lot of development and growth to do. And in the Middle East, it's still difficult just to maintain a country. Because if you don't have a tyrant like Saddam Hussein holding that collection of people together through cruelty and authoritarian tactics, what's most likely to happen is exactly what did happen after the U.S. invaded Iraq and destabilized the region, is that the different competing interests, the Sunnis and the Shias and the Kurds and so forth, they all divide up, and they each want their own little region. They don't want to be united. They don't want to have a democracy. And then, of course, larger stakeholders in the region like Iran or maybe even Russia or something. They're opportunistic, so they want to exploit these smaller countries and these smaller new regions. They're easy to destabilize. They're not as united as they were before under Saddam. So now they get in there. They infuse money. They infuse weapons and military because, they want control and they want to manipulate all that for their benefit. They want the oil and so forth. And then you got various terrorist groups that arise that want to reunite everybody in some sort of Islamic caliphate. And then, of course, but the Sunnis and Shiites, that's a division within Islam. But then each of those, if you go on Wikipedia, you can research this. I was looking at it just today. They have individual subdivisions within the Sunnis and within the Shiites, many of them, sometimes up to a dozen different subtypes of Sunnis and subtypes of Shiites. And so isn't that interesting? Is that even the Sunnis and the Shias themselves can't be united because they have different opinions about how their religion should be organized, how it should be actualized, and how it should be embodied in the world, how it should be taught, and so forth. What kind of laws should be passed. How about the 13 American colonies? When the United States was founded, the key word there is united. See, it's right there, even in the name of the country, United States. It's a unity of divided things, which is just another metaphor for what reality is. It's a unity of divided individual things. So we had the 13 colonies originally. We had the Articles of Confederation. That was prior to the forming of the United States. And at that point, people were happy with that situation. They wanted a lot of independence and autonomy, the individual colonies. Many of the founding fathers were very apprehensive about forming a United States. They believed that it should just be 13 individual loose colonies. But then higher wisdom prevailed, and people realized pretty quickly that, hey, you know what? We're going to be attacked by the English. We're going to be attacked by the French, maybe. We're going to be attacked by other nations in the future, so we got to rally together. And so they did, and they created the United States. But still, even though the United States is united as one country, still there's a lot of difference and division. We have individual states, 50 of them. They have their own laws, their own court systems. See? So we function as both a unity, but not just a total unity of just a complete merging together. We merge together, but still remain individual to some degree. We remain autonomous to some degree. And that's what's happening all up and down the chain of reality. Of course, the European Union is the same thing. The EU was formed after World War II. That brought economic prosperity and peace to the region, which was really good for them. But also it brought their own problems because certain players in the EU are not contributing as much as other players. Certain players are dragging the whole thing down. They're exploiting it, whatever. Different countries want to maintain their nationalist identities because, of course, those spiral dynamic stage blue people in Poland or in Hungary or in Italy or in France or in Germany, they don't like the idea of some European identity. They want their German identity. They want their Polish identity. They want their Hungarian identity. They want their Italian identity. And so you have nationalist parties rising right now in all these different countries. You have Brexit. What is Brexit? So we had a reunion of the European Union, the formation of the European Union. That was good for a while. But now we have fractures. We have a division with the Brexit thing happening. But of course, see, the Brexit thing is so difficult precisely because the union is so beneficial that it's really difficult to leave it. You would think let's just leave the EU and just be by ourselves. Well, if you do that, you're probably going to have a worse life than you did when you were in the EU. But many of those stage blue people who are for Brexit, all they care about is their British identity. They're basically nationalists. And so they don't want to be beholden to some sort of higher entity called the EU. And the same thing happens in the United States. The United States, many right-wingers and conservatives, sage blue people, They don't like being beholden to some United Nations, something larger than the United States. Yet at the same time, if we want to have peace in the world, we want a more globalized, interconnected world where people can travel freely and do trade freely and easily around the world, where we have internet all around the world and people can talk and share around the world. We want to have some sort of unified laws. See? So we have to start to interconnect the different nations. That's what the EU is for. And that's very important. But many right-wingers don't understand this. They think that this can somehow be avoided. You can't avoid this. The world is going to become globalized. Technology will demand it. People will demand it. Travel will demand it. You want to be able to travel to some place in Africa and not get your head chopped off. And the only way that's going to be possible is through globalization. See? You want to make sure that if you're sitting in America on your computer and somebody from Nigeria hacks your bank account and steals a bunch of your life savings, you want to make sure that you can sue them in court and not have that difference between, just because there's an Atlantic Ocean between you two, doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to sue some Nigerian who stole all of your money in America. Right now, that would be very difficult to do. But in 100 years and 1,000 years, we're going to have international laws, international courts, which will make it very easy to sue people from Nigeria or America or Australia or Canada or wherever else. See, so those are some of the benefits. Now, of course, to get those benefits, there are costs. So there's, like I said, there's no purely positive and purely negative. There's trade-offs always when you unite things, and there's trade-offs when you divide things. And that's tricky. There's no clear, simple, black and white answers about how much should we be united and how much should we be divided. It's really a combination. It's division within unity, within division, within unity, within division, within unity. It's a nest. Picture one of those Russian dolls, those nesting dolls. That's what it's like. It's a fractal of this. And it goes all the way up and all the way down. Try to imagine, for example, how your body would function if every individual cell in your body wanted to maintain maximum independence and autonomy for itself. And even we could even take this to a bigger level, like each organ in your body. Let's say that each organ in your body didn't want to unite and coordinate, but it wanted to be arrogant and just do whatever it wanted to do. Like your heart was going to only pump the blood to those places where it wanted to. But it wouldn't pump the blood to the kidneys, or it wouldn't pump the blood to your hands or to your feet because it didn't like those. It wanted to be free. See, you couldn't be alive this way. To get a complex organism, you need sophisticated coordination. And this is what many libertarians and right-wingers don't understand about how society and civilization works. Because they only tout individualism as though individualism is some absolute good. And freedom as though freedom is an absolute good. Freedom is not an absolute good, and individualism is not an absolute good. All of reality is deeply interconnected. And no part of reality is totally free or totally independent of the other parts. And certainly this is not possible within any biological life form. In fact, the individual cells in your body have to be very selfless and very willing to participate in some sort of larger cause or purpose in order for your body to function as it is. Because if every cell in your body just wanted to do its own thing and it said, fuck you to everybody else, I'm just going to be a libertarian, I'm going to follow the libertarian ideals of just whatever's good for me, that doesn't work. And of course, it doesn't work in a society either. Humans can't behave this way and still maintain a highly coordinated society where we have amazing things like space travel and jumbo jets and airports and international laws and the internet and so forth. For that stuff to happen, there needs to be massive coordination. It needs to be very sophisticated and delicate and nuanced. You can't just live as though you're living for yourself. If you want to live that way in that kind of society, then you're talking about living in a more primitive state than hunter-gatherer tribes in the Amazon, because even they need to coordinate significantly to be able to survive in that jungle. See, this is what the libertarian mind doesn't understand, is just how much human life and survival is contingent upon collectivism. And it's actually only because of the enormous and sophisticated collective organization of hundreds and thousands of previous generations of humans that we've been able to become so technologically advanced to the point where now you can be a libertarian in current times, and you can sit back in your apartment by yourself thinking that you're an individual and that you're not part of a society, and that you should be able to do whatever you want. You should just have total freedom. You should be free to own a gun. You should be free to own a tank. You should be free to own a rocket launcher. You should be able to say whatever you want to say. You should be able to be free. I should be able to be free to start a business and to exclude whoever I want. I can exclude gay people. I can exclude black people. I can exclude some, short person that I don't like, whatever. Because, hey, freedom. But that freedom is only possible through this massive collective organization that we have. And you have to appreciate your role in that. You see, it's the height of arrogance to think that somehow you are entitled to freedom and to individualism. You're not entitled to these things at all. Not at all. This is a benefit that you earn through lots of coordination and cooperation. Otherwise, you'd probably be dead already. Your entire family line would have been exterminated a long time ago if humans truly operated under these libertarian principles of maximizing freedom and individualism. Now, with that said, of course, there's also the opposite danger. There's a danger of becoming too integrated, too merged together. It is possible to trample individual rights. It is possible to create some sort of monstrosity Borg collective where everybody is just like a pawn or a cog in the machine, so to speak, and there's no privacy, there's no freedom, and you're basically completely enslaved. So what's the right way to build society? Well, it's not through any one of these ideologies, it's through a very delicate interplay between all of the nuances and details of this. See? Which is why no individual ideology like communism or libertarianism or capitalism or whatever else, none of these will actually be sufficient to create the kind of society we need to create. If it was as simple as coming up with some sort of stupid black and white ideology that just said, we got to maximize workers' rights to the hilt, or we got to maximize corporate freedom, or we got to maximize individual gun rights, or whatever. If it was that simple, we would have already done it and we would be living in a utopia. It's not that simple. The devil is all in the details. And then where politics and economics gets really screwed up is when people adopt these simplistic ideologies thinking that they understand how to build a great society without realizing this very delicate interplay between division and unity, which is happening all of the time, not just in society, but society is just one instance of a much larger pattern that we're talking about here. How about China's treatment of Muslim minorities and the Tibetans? China is trying to build a unified civilization. In the hopes of achieving that, they're willing to go to great lengths. They're building a massive surveillance state. Their citizens are not able to participate and vote. In many ways, we might say that China is sort of going towards that extreme of overly collectivist, overly trampling on individual rights. They don't respect religious minorities there. They're doing terrible things with their Muslim minorities. They're sending them into indoctrination camps, re-education camps, basically concentration camps, treating them terribly. The stuff they did to the Tibetans, quite terrible as well. Various crackdowns they're doing in Hong Kong, also problematic. But from their point of view, what is China doing all this for? Are they evil? Is that what they're doing? No, of course not. China is actually doing it out of love. Love, of course, is union, reunion. Another word for reunion is love. So from the Chinese perspective, they're doing this because it's important for them to become a superpower in the world. They spend a lot of time in poverty. They have over 1 billion of people, most of whom who were in poverty for just as recently as 50 years ago. And so they need to do a lot of rapid development, and they have been doing that. And in many ways, they're outpacing Americans, and they're going to be the biggest nation in the world. They're going to be the biggest superpower in the world pretty soon. They're going to be the biggest economy in the world pretty soon. And so they're emerging as a world superpower. And from their point of view, that's more important than maintaining individual religious rights. See? Now, I'm not justifying what they're doing. I'm not saying that what they're doing is good or bad. There are trade-offs. You see, the mistake is to look at the China situation to see, oh, the Chinese are so evil because they don't respect privacy, and they're bad to the Tibetans, and they're bad to the Muslims. No, it's a mixed bag. There are certain things that the Chinese are doing which are very problematic, and there are certain things that the Chinese are doing which are great, which are helping the whole world. They have giant manufacturing centers that allow for the production of most of the world's products at cheap prices, which enables you to enjoy the luxury that you enjoy here in America. You see, so while you're sitting here simple-mindedly criticizing the Chinese, you're simultaneously not realizing how much you're benefiting from what China has been doing over the last 50 years. See, so this isn't about judgment or criticism of anybody. It's about realizing that there's something much larger going on in the universe here. Consciousness is going through a process of polarization and depolarization, division and reunion. It's not about good and bad. It just is what it is. Before you judge it, understand what it is that you're judging. Understand how complex and sophisticated it is. Understand that all of your stupid little ideologies, whatever they are utterly inadequate to explain and to understand and to navigate what's coming in the future. The Roman Empire is a great example of division and reunification. There were many different individual city-states all across the Mediterranean. The Roman Empire came to power. They dominated all the way up to Britain, all the way down to Spain, and even into Africa and into Egypt and all this. They dominated all this land and all the way out to Persia, all the way into Germany. But then they got too big. The Roman Empire was so massive that then it started to decay. It was hard to keep that order and that giant monopoly on the Mediterranean intact. And so slowly, the other nations and tribes started to pick them off from the sides. There was internal corruption, internal division, and then it all fell apart. And then it reunited. 2,000 years later, now we have the European Union, which in a certain sense is almost like version 2.0 of the Roman Empire. Now, of course, it's not dominated by Rome anymore, but that was, in a certain sense, like what the European Empire was trying to do, what the emperors and Caesar and Augustus especially were trying to do. I think their ideal for the Roman Empire was something like the EU, with, of course, them on top. So, of course, that was in their self-interest to do that. But you can see that it wasn't actually an evil intention. It was actually coming from a loving place. They wanted to unite all the different city-states and tribes of the Middle Eastern area so that there could be peace, there could be prosperity, there could be easy trade, there could be roads, there could be ship travel, and there could be common currency, right? Because this is good for everybody when you can unite. The problem is, how do you get millions of diverse, divided peoples and entities and organizations to all agree on uniting together? You see, because they all have their own self-agendas. They all have their own unique needs. The people in the North have different needs than the people in the South, than the people in the East versus the people in the West. So who gets to say how we structure this empire? And then there's a battle over that. And then that battle of how to unite us is the very thing that ends up dividing us. You see? The Soviet Union. Similar situation happened there. At the height of the Soviet Union, there were like 20 different satellite states of the Soviet Union, of Russia. And then with the fall of communism and the collapse of the Berlin Wall, all of that divided. See, as it's funny because in Berlin, the Berlin Wall, there was that separation between East and West Germany. So as that wall fell and Berlin and Germany got reunited from being divided, the opposite thing happened with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, which was united, now became divided. Now you have all these individual states that split off from Russia. Interesting how that works. Is one better than the other? No, there's trade-offs to each. Sometimes things get so divided that it becomes untenable, unsustainable, and a reunion is deeply craved and needed. That's what happened, for example, with East and West Germany in Berlin, the Berlin Wall. Or sometimes you have the opposite, is that the union gets so extreme and it becomes so unstable and untenable that it has to break apart and it has to divide, which is what happened with the Soviet Union. Couldn't be maintained. It's very interesting that even spirituality is not immune to this. You would think like, well, spiritual people, because they're studying this stuff, they should have a deep grasp of unity and they should be able to maintain unity at all times. But this is obviously not the case. If we look at religious history, what do we have? We have different religions arising, different churches. At first, they're united. Christianity was originally united. But of course, even when I say that, already it's not true because Christianity was a division of Judaism. So originally we might say we had a united Judaism. But then, of course, even within Judaism, that split apart into various groups, one of which became Christianity. Then the Christians, they rose to power and they took over the Mediterranean region, and it was a united Christianity at first. But then that broke apart into the Catholic Church, and that broke apart into the Orthodox Christians, and then the Catholic Church broke apart into the Protestants versus the Catholics. Then those broke apart even further. Then when Christianity came to America, that broke apart even further. Then we got Mormons. Then we got, all the different denominations of Christians. I don't even know them all. The Episcopalians, the Presbyterians, the whatever. We got all those. So you see, even the most spiritual people can't keep their shit together. They divide. And of course, Islam was just an offshoot, basically, of Judaism and Christianity. And then, of course, Islam couldn't keep their shit together either. Because then you had the Sunnis, you had the Shias, you had the Kurds and others. And then each of those, even those couldn't keep their shit together. Because even they had to split apart even further. And of course, you might say, oh, well, Leo, these are the Abrahamic traditions in the West. In the East, it's better. No, it's not. It's even worse in the East. In the East, there was Hinduism, tons of different schools of Hinduism. In the East, there was Buddhism, which was basically an offshoot of yoga and Hinduism. And then Buddhism itself started to split into the three major schools, Vajrayana, Theravada, and whatever else I'm forgetting, the Tibetan Buddhists. And then those split even further and further and further. And then you got Chan from China, which was the predecessor to Zen. Then you had Zen in Japan. Then in Japan, Zen split into Rinzai, is it Rinzai Zen, Soto Zen, and then there's others. Then Zen came to the West, and now in the West, we have basically a Western American version of Zen. See, even Zen, you might say Zen is the most hardcore and the most uncorrupt of spiritual traditions. No, even they can't keep it together. And yoga is this way too. What about yoga? How many schools of yoga are there? There's hundreds, literally hundreds. You could even take one school of yoga, like take Kriya Yoga, which I'm a fan of. How many versions of Kriya Yoga exist? Probably hundreds. Why does this happen? See, that's my question to you. I want you to contemplate. Ask yourself, why does this happen? Why does it keep happening? This isn't something that happened once or twice. This is not some sort of fluke or accident. This always happens. Why does this happen? If there's one God and one truth, why does this happen? Why all the war? Why different sects? Why different countries? Why do we care about maintaining borders between countries? Why do we form different alliances? Why do we have different tribes that fight each other? Why do people have a problem with globalism? Why do people have a problem with nationalism? Why do we have different races? Why do people have a problem marrying or having sex with other races? Why do we have racism? See? I want you to find the larger pattern here. Look at it from a bird's eye view. Look at it from a God's eye view. How about the example of the rise of the internet? You know, when the internet first started, there was a massive proliferation, almost like speciation, of different small mom and pop websites. Everybody was starting their own website, their own storefront, their own blog, their own platform, their own social bookmarking site, their own social media site, their own forum. But then, over time, as the internet became more commercialized, things started to solidify more. And a lot of these little mom and pop websites and stores and so forth, they got, at first we had this diversification, this division, and then we started to get a unification. We started to get larger platforms that came on top. We got Facebook, we got YouTube, we got Google, we got Amazon, we got a few of these key websites that dominate the majority of the internet. There aren't 100 different video sharing sites. There's only one or two. There's not 100 different social, friend platforms. There's like one, two, maybe. I don't even know if MySpace is around anymore. There's like only one search engine, basically. There's Bing. There's a few others, but they're so small compared to Google that for all intents and purposes, there's one. There's basically one website that dominates all e-commerce, which is Amazon. See, this sort of monopolization of the internet. Now you might say, oh, this is terrible. Well, it's terrible from the point of view of little mom and pop shops. The gold rush era of the internet is over. It's very hard to start your own very successful website these days because most of the niches are already taken and well occupied. And in a certain sense, that's terrible. I was involved with the internet from the very beginning almost. Like, I remember I was on the internet in 95, 96. And I remember I started my first website. I created a website back in 98. It was a Pokemon website. I was into Pokemon. I was literally just like 12 years old. But I was so interested in the internet, I learned how to do HTML. And I coded my own Pokemon website. I don't think I even published it live. But I put a lot of energy into this Pokemon website. But it was good. It was a good learning experience for, future stuff that I would create. That's no longer possible to really do. And so you might say it's terrible that we have a few of these large companies dominating everything. Well, in a certain sense, it's terrible, but in another sense, it's great because, Amazon's very convenient. You can go to one place and buy all your stuff there. Good prices, good shipping. The shipping can only be so fast. Now they have one-day shipping. The only reason you can have one-day shipping is because you have the economy of scale of unifying, what is essentially a bunch of different e-commerce sites together into one. And that's what allows for really fast shipping and really low prices. Their profit margins can be a lot smaller than, if you had a bunch of mom and pop shops. Same thing with Facebook. If we had 10 different friend websites where you meet your friends, everybody's it would all be split apart. You couldn't really go to one place to talk with all of your friends because one friend would be here, another friend would be there. It would be hard to get them all together. So the whole value of Facebook is that you unify them all together. But of course, that value is exactly what's the problem with it. Because once everybody is unified together, it just becomes this incestuous cesspool of just like, the same friends all jerking off to each other, wasting time together. And all of them, of course, being milked and exploited then by Facebook. So there's pros and cons. Where people really go wrong is they get stuck on one end of the pole or the other end of the pole. And they either think Facebook is all evil, or like YouTube is all evil, Amazon is all evil. And they don't see actually what is being provided there by this unification. Then we have what's going on in the corporate sector, which is we have over the last 50 years, there's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions of companies. There's been a lot of monopoly making going on in the last 50 years. Companies, because the antitrust laws in America are so terrible, they're basically unenforced. And so large companies buy up smaller companies, and they just keep buying them up and buying them up and buying them up and buying them up, to the point where it's becoming toxic, because it's getting hard to start a company even, because these larger companies, how do you compete with AT&T? How do you compete with Disney? How do you compete with Amazon? How do you compete with Google? How do you compete with Coca-Cola? It used to be a lot easier than it is now, because these companies have hundreds of billions of dollars to beat all their competitors with. And even if you do succeed, they'll buy you out. In fact, that very process of starting a company and then being bought out by a bigger company, that is the very process we're talking about here of divergence and convergence, division and unity. Because when you start a small company, what you're trying to actually do when you start, because you want to compete against the big guys. So first what you want to do is you want to differentiate yourself from the big guys. You want to say that, oh, we're this little company, we give you personal service, we're not these corporate giant overlords, we love our customers more, we cater to our customers more, blah, 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 blah. So in this way, we're differentiating, we're dividing ourselves from those giant corporations. But then as we grow, we become more successful because people like that. They come to us, they buy our stuff, they love it. There's a great customer and a corporate relationship that we got going, but that grows the business. As we grow bigger as a corporation, we become more greedy. We stop caring about our customers as much. And we become more interested in reuniting with our competitors. So now all of a sudden, once my company gets big enough, now I want to be bought out by those people, those competitors that I hated. Because if they can buy me out, I can walk away with a giant sum of money. I don't have to care about it anymore. And then this little company that I started now becomes a part, just an organ in the larger organization of AT&T or Disney or Google or whatever else. And then sometimes we even have the opposite trend, where companies become so big and so bloated, these mergers, that even the companies themselves realize that this is not workable. Even they don't want it. So you have giant mergers like AOL Time Warner, and then they decide that, oh, we gotta split it off, sell off AOL or something. Or you have, for example, eBay, which purchased PayPal, and then they spun off PayPal into its own company after they bought it. Which you would think, like, why would they do that? Well, because they found that it wasn't effective to have this one giant corporation. So it was better for them to split off and to be individual. And so they did that. And maybe in the future they'll reunite again. Who knows? And now that we have these giant monopolies, what are we going to have? We're going to have a populist uprising in America, and we're going to have progressives come into power, and they're going to put some strong antitrust measures into place. They're going to start splitting up these companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon, AT&T, Disney. These companies really need to be split up because it's getting to the point where it's really hurting average, ordinary citizens, because these companies have so much money, so much power that they're almost getting bigger than the government. So they're able to manipulate the government too much. See? There needs to be a delicate balance between the size of the government and the size of the corporations. Because if the corporations become so rich and so powerful, they overtake the government, then this undermines democracy, and then basically you become enslaved to the corporation. Because you don't have a say in what the corporation does. At least with the government, you get a vote once every few years. Not with the corporation. Not unless you own half of its stock or something like that, which nobody does. A corporation is basically a tyranny, in effect, or an oligarchy, rather than a democracy. See, how about the whole process of just birth and life? Birth is a division or a polarization within consciousness. Consciousness literally splits itself into two different organisms, creating a sharp distinction between two parts of itself. Then this organism grows up, it runs around and eats other organisms. See, the only way an organism can survive is by eating other organisms, unless you're a plant, maybe. Even if you're vegan, you're still eating other organisms. You're just really in denial about it. So you're eating these other organisms. But what is the process of eating? Just to put one organism in your mouth is already the process of reunion. You divided yourself from the other organism. Now you're eating this other organism, you're putting it into your body, you're reuniting with it, you're using its energy to fuel you. See? Then, of course, you're excreting those parts of it that you can't utilize. And that process of excretion is a process of division. So see, just by eating, that's a reunion. Excretion is division. Then, of course, to have different mammals, you have different genders of mammals. That creating of a male or a female mammal is itself now a division, sort of within the species. Then, of course, that is done so that we can have sex. That allows for a reunion in the future. So that gets reunited. And in that very process of reunion is when a new birth happens. So male, female come together, new birth happens. As they're united, at the very moment of maximum union is when the next division is created, which is literally the next birth. So the egg and the sperm come together, they meet, and then that meeting of them creates a new united entity, a little zygote or whatever you call a little embryo, and that thing then grows and separates from the parents, creating a new being or a new life. Pretty cool, huh? Pretty beautiful when you think about it. But it doesn't end there. Now you have the little embryo, the fertilized union of the egg and the sperm. So they all mix together to create one cell. At first, it's just like one cell. Then what happens? How do you get a human? You have to subdivide that cell. So you cut it in half, then you cut that in half, you cut that in half, keep cutting in half. Every cell keeps cutting in half. And then quickly you get millions and billions and trillions of cells through what? A process of division. This division all ultimately leads to one unified baby. This baby becomes old enough, it divides from the mother. There's a division, baby comes out, cut the umbilical cord. Now the baby is divided on its own, in individuated unit of consciousness. But this baby still needs the mother. So now there needs to be a new reunion. So as soon as the baby is divided from the mother, immediately the doctor brings it back to the mother, after running a few health checks, brings it back to the mother. Now the baby is sucking on the mother's teat. Reunion. See? But of course, over the years, the baby grows up, the baby becomes more independent, but the baby still lives with the parents, within the family. So the family is now a unit. But eventually, the baby becomes a teenager. The teenager starts to rebel against the parents. Again, a division now is forming. What was a cohesive family unit now, there needs to be a separation because the teen eventually needs to leave the nest and totally separate from the parents and start their own family. And this whole process begins again. And of course, then the parents die. The parents get old and die through a process of reunion. The very death of the parents will be a reunion of the parent into infinite consciousness. And then the child will grow up and ultimately die as well. And when the child dies, the parent and the child literally reunite in the very opposite of the birth process. Ta-da! That's what's going on. Nothing else but this. How about atoms at the physical, chemical level? You have atoms, which are individual units of stuff, of matter, and then they come up with they constitute up molecules. You get a bunch of atoms together, that makes a molecule. That's a union. Then those molecules unify together even further to create a protein. Then those proteins unify further to create a cell, which unify further to create an organ, which unify further to create an organism, which unify further to create a family, a tribe, an ethnicity, a nation, a planet, a species. How about the way that various intellectual fields subspecialize? So early on in human history, there was no science, no religion. It was all basically philosophy. There was one intellectual pursuit, which was philosophy, which included natural science, or the early beginnings of it. It included some religion, some mysticism, and other things like this. It even included mathematics. But then, as these different fields started to develop on their own, they started to split off from philosophy. So from philosophy, we got natural science and ultimately modern science. And then from philosophy split off mysticism and religion. And then, of course, each one of those that split off then itself became further subspecialized. So science split off, then science split into chemistry, biology, physics, psychology, sociology, and all the other ologies. But then each one of those split even further. So physics split into quantum mechanics, split into general relativity, split into cosmology, split into astronomy, astronomy, and on and on and on. Even those. So even within quantum mechanics, there's different subfields of quantum mechanics. Same thing with mathematics. Mathematics split off, then mathematics split off into other mathematics. You have topology, you have statistics, you have geometry, you have calculus, you have trigonometry, you have God knows what else. And then each of those keeps splitting and splitting and splitting. As this happens, human knowledge becomes siloed and very fragmented, such that you could spend 50 years studying one little narrow subfield without seeing the bigger picture. And now what's starting to happen is that scientists and others are starting to realize that, wait a minute, we can't just go into the direction of infinite specialization forever. We need to start to communicate between these different siloed subfields. And so now the big trend in academia is, how do we get different fields talking to each other? How do we get chemistry and biology talking to themselves? How do we get psychology and physics talking to themselves? What kind of interesting interconnections there? And so the science, now the newest science, the most cutting edge science, is about reuniting what was divided, siloed knowledge. And so this is now the emergence of systems thinking and holism. And now there are attempts to find the grand theory of everything. The theory of everything is only found by now taking all of this fragmented knowledge and unifying it together and asking ourselves, okay, from the big picture, if we zoom all the way out, what is all of this different science, mathematics, philosophy, religion, what is all of it pointing to? What is all of it telling us? And of course, that's where my work comes in. I'm very interested in holism and theories of everything. And so that's kind of what I'm giving you, is I'm integrating all the different areas of knowledge from psychology, sociology, developmental psychology, physics, and mysticism and religion and all this. So we're combining it all together. Self-help, business, marketing, politics, economics. We're trying to unify it all so that we can understand what is human life about. See? Right now, science and religion, or science and mysticism, are separated still. And some people believe it should be that way. But it's not going to stay that way. Science and mysticism will reconverge together. And that's part of what I'm doing with my work, is helping in the future to get that reunion to happen. So if we really want to advance science to the next level, then what we need to do is we need to start to integrate science with the deepest insights of mystics. We got to integrate psychic phenomena with science. We got to integrate the first person with the third person, the objective with the subjective. We need scientists doing meditation. We need scientists doing yoga. We need scientists doing psychedelics. We need scientists having paranormal experiences themselves and studying this stuff and integrating it and then spreading it throughout culture and society. And that will happen. There's a lot of resistance to it, but it's already starting to happen slowly. It'll take hundreds of years to fully actualize that, but it's starting to happen. That's the reunion of science and mysticism. See, originally, 2,000 years ago, they were the same discipline. Then they separated, and now they're going to reunite in the next 1,000 years. How about 3D modeling? Have you ever 3D modeled something? Those of you who had, I used to be big into 3D modeling. I did a lot of work in Maya, and 3D Studio Max was my favorite for 3D modeling work. And how do you make a detailed 3D model? Usually the way that I would begin is I would just literally begin with a square. You take a cubed volume. You start with that, and then let's say you want to create some sort of creature, a dragon or something. You take that, then you start to subdivide it, almost like subdividing an embryo to create a human. It's almost the same process in 3D modeling. You start to subdivide the polygons. You split it, you extrude it some more, subdivide that one a little bit more, and each time you subdivide it, you can get finer detail. You can subdivide and pull out individual polygons, extrude them, create legs, create tail, create arms, create claws, create fingers, all of this. This is a process of subdivision. And then what's interesting about it is that you don't stop there. Once you've got your whole extruded shape, the whole dragon, let's say, then you actually now you begin the process of reunification. Now what you do is you create these things called smoothing groups, which means that you take individual parts, certain subgroups of polygons on your model that you want to be like smoothed out. You take those, like if you were building a car, for example, you might take one side of the car, combine these polygons on the door, and then you apply a smoothing group to it, designating this to be one kind of smooth shape. And then you create another smoothing group for the top of the car, for the roof, another one for the hood, another one for the tail lights and front lights and so forth. And in this way, you create these different smoothing groups, and then you assign different textures to it. And then ultimately, all of this subdivision and all of this reunification creates the ultimate grand unity of the one individual model object. That then you could put that into a 3D scene. You might have built a scene with different other 3D objects. You take individual objects, which are divided objects, individual files, right? Each model has its own file, but then you can combine them all into one scene, like if you're creating a movie or something or a video game, put it all into one scene, which is made up of individual distinct files that it's pulling objects from, and then you can render that to create one unified picture or movie or whatever. How about caste systems? Like in India, they had the caste system of different hierarchy of castes. And now that caste system is starting to crumble. In Europe, there was also a caste system. It was called the Ancien Regime. And then with the French Revolution, what that was about was breaking down the caste system. Because before the French Revolution, you had the aristocrats and the nobility and the landowners. And then you had all the sort of like serfs and plebs down below. Then you had the bourgeois class, all this. And then so all of this had to kind of crumble with the French Revolution. And now in the West, we don't really have a caste system. Although, now with rampant capitalism run amok and neoliberalism run amok, what we're getting is we're sort of getting a new caste system, which isn't based on titles and nobility and aristocracy, but is based purely on your wealth. So we're now starting to get a division, this gross income inequality, where the millionaires and billionaires are getting richer, and the rest of the 99% are stagnating and even experiencing a decline in their wealth. And so this has been going on for the last 30 or 40 years in America, especially since basically Reagan came into power. And now it's coming to a head. People are getting pissed off about it. We're having populist uprisings. Eventually this is not going to be sustainable. This gross income inequality is not going to be sustainable. And there's going to have to be right now there's a division that was created in the last 30 or 40 years since Reagan. That division is going to have to collapse as there's going to be a redistribution of wealth, which is why there's now a renewed interest in talking about socialism. People like Bernie Sanders and so forth coming to prominence and popularity. And this will just keep going more and more and more. There will be a more and more interest in socialism as the income gap grows wider and wider and wider. And then if someone like Bernie Sanders comes to power or some other democratic socialist comes to power, then they will try to narrow that gap by doing redistribution of wealth. The mistake that many people make is they think that there's one absolute good here. They think that either redistributing wealth is the best or capitalism, rampant capitalism is the best. But that's not the case. The case is that it's a delicate balance between these two things, and it's going to change over time depending on what is needed at the time. When this is not understood, that only deepens our problem. Because people get ideological about, like, oh, taxation is evil, or socialism is evil, or redistribution of wealth is evil. No, it's not. But neither is capitalism evil. Because see, people also then, if they like redistribution of wealth, then they get this idea that, well, if socialism is good, that means capitalism must be evil. But that's also not right. Both extremes are wrong. Which is not to say that we take the middle point between the two. It's a dynamic equilibrium. It depends. Right now, our pendulum has been swung so far to the right with neoliberalism and with rampant capitalism and libertarianism that now it needs to swing back to the left to socialism and democratic socialism and redistribution of wealth and higher taxation and populism. Once that is, goes too far, then we got to swing it back again to the opposite end. How about the social justice warriors versus the anti-social justice warriors? So the social justice warriors are the ones who want more unity, and the anti-social justice warriors are the ones who want more individualism and less collectivism, more division. How about the example of global warming? How does global warming happen? Well, there are oil deposits separated, divided from each other all over the earth underground. A bunch of different pools of oil. All separate and divided. We also have a bunch of ice on mountain ranges and in the North Pole and in the South Pole. This ice is water that has been separated and divided from the ocean, from the ordinary hydrological cycle. So this ice doesn't really change much. It just kind of sits there. It's locked, divided. But then as we tap the soil, suck it out, and burn it, what happens is that we reunite the oil with the rest of the planetary system. It used to be locked into just a pool. Now we reunite the oil with the atmosphere by melting it. As we do that, of course, the planet warms up, and this melts the ice on the locked ice on the North and South Pole and on the mountain ranges. And as this happens, we're reuniting that divided and separated ice with the ocean and the kind of normal functional hydrological cycle. It's no longer locked. Of course, that increases the whole diameter of all the water on the planet, leading to rising sea levels. And as that's happening, what's happening is that we're actually taking the energy, because the energy of the core of the planet, which is really hot at the center of the planet, and we're reuniting that, we're merging that with the outer cold temperature of outer space in which the planet is situated, right? So constantly temperature from the planet is leaking from the atmosphere and so forth into outer space, trying to create an equilibrium between outer space and the Earth. So eventually, over billions of years, if the Earth just sits here, all of its internal temperature will dissipate out into space and it will become cold. And then, of course, the sun is doing the same thing. It's leaking energy out from its core. Some of it is hitting the Earth, warming up the Earth. So the temperature difference between the Earth and the sun, we might say there's a division between the two because one is low temperature, the other is high temperature. But that sun is leaking its energy out and is trying to find an equilibrium. An equilibrium just means a reunion. And eventually the sun will burn itself out and reunite with the empty space that it's found in. How about within relationships, intimate relationships? At first, you two are totally divided, man and woman, let's say. Then you two meet, you start to date, start to fall in love, romance happens, and you're both desperate to get together and to reunite. And so you do that, you reunite, you have sex, it's wonderful. That's what you really want. But do you want to stay in that union forever? Of course not. As soon as you have sex, immediately there's a countervailing force which pushes you apart, and now you want your space. You're too close together. It's too much intimacy. So you want to separate after sex. But then, of course, you like the sex. So you want to come back together and have sex again. So you do that. But then the more you have sex, the more you want to separate again. And so the more you have sex, the more you fight. The more you fight, the more you make up. The more you make up, the more you fight again. And so there's this delicate balancing act between intimacy and distance, which is happening all the time. Because the problem with too much intimacy is that you lose your sense of identity and your sense of selfhood, your sense of autonomy. You two move in together, and now all of a sudden your life feels cramped. You can't have all the same freedoms you used to have once you're moved in with your girlfriend or your boyfriend. Now you got to share the same toilet, the same bed, the same kitchen, and all this. Now that leads to more fighting than when you used to live separately. Of course, there's benefits that come with it too. Eventually, maybe you get married. Of course, that is a reunion. But then the marriage becomes too united to be comfortable. You want your autonomy back, so you get divorced. Right? That's all this is. That's all it is. How about gender roles? Genders are first divided into male and female. For many thousands of years, mankind has lived this way because that was important. A strong division between male and female was important because the physiological differences between the two were more prominent and important back then when technology wasn't sophisticated. Now the technology has equalized men and women at a physical level. Now that physical prowess is not so important anymore. Now male and female can basically do the same job in many cases. And also the importance of the family is less important now that we have overpopulation. And so this old notion of being gay versus being straight, the importance of being straight is not a big deal anymore. And so now we have more people going gay. We have people blending the boundary between male and female, transgenderism, and various other kinds of genders, and people want to use different gender pronouns and all this sort of stuff. And this is freaking out a lot of traditional people. Why is it freaking them out? Because the old boundaries are getting questioned and broken down. But really, if you understood this giant perspective that I'm sharing with you here, is you would have understood that there's nothing sacred about the male-female boundary or between gay and straight. One is not better than the other. These are artificial boundaries. These boundaries were created. These boundaries will be destroyed. Division and reunion. We've had a lot of division on this front for thousands of years. Now we're getting some reunion, but people are worried about it. There's a big brouhaha about transgender bathrooms. What is that? Literally, people want to reunite bathrooms after they've been divided for thousands of years. And then people freak out over it. Well, you wouldn't freak out if you saw this larger perspective that I'm sharing with you. Which is not to say that you have to have only one bathroom. there might be some value in keeping them divided. But also, if it turns out that there's value in uniting them, you should be open to uniting them. See, this is what it means to have an open mind. You're not attached to anything. You're willing to go with whatever works, not with some tradition or some ideology that was programmed into your mind by some people in the past. We have a lot of different cuisines. Where do these cuisines come from? We have the French cuisine, Italian cuisine, Japanese cuisine, Chinese cuisine, Indian cuisine. You know, these were developed over thousands of years because these different ethnic groups lived in different parts of the world, which had different fruits, different vegetables, different animals, different products. They had to use what was local to feed themselves. And of course, around this developed different kinds of cuisines. But now we have a fusion of cuisines. That's what it's called, fusion. There are fusion restaurants which combine French and Japanese. This is like the latest trend in fine dining, combining different cuisines. American with Italian, or Italian with Chinese, or whatever. And then you get interesting new combinations. But then some people are purists, and they say, well, you know, that's not authentic Italian food. That's not authentic Japanese food, because you've corrupted it by unifying it with, or fusing it with French or with something else. You know, they want the pure bread. They want the original French food, unadulterated by any other influences. But if you take that rigid position, then you're missing out on the beautiful fusion dishes that could be created. You see, there's pros and cons. There's certain value in maintaining the integrity and purity of French cuisine as it used to be in the olden days. But then there's a lot of amazing stuff that you'll miss out on if you are just closed-minded in that way and too purist. You're going to miss out on a bunch of like cool fusion dishes. But then also, if you fuse all the cuisines together, that's also not good, because if everything is fused together, it just becomes one muddled mess. You know, you don't want to go to a restaurant which literally fuses Japanese, Chinese, French, Italian, American, Russian, and African all into one single dish. That would probably taste very gross. And then if you had only one dish in the world, you would be sick of it. You'd want diversity. Imagine if we made a soup out of every ingredient that every culture on the whole planet ate. This giant stew, this infinite stew, which is just a complete muddled mess. It has a flavor of everything. It has sugar, pepper, salt, you know, garlic in there, fish and meat and vegetables and fruits, all of it together into one. This would be the nastiest thing. And you'd be so sick and tired of eating it every day, you'd want something more individuated. And you'd invent it. And that is literally what the universe is doing. See, the universe started out as this giant infinite stew, completely undifferentiated. But then it sort of, you might say, it got bored with itself, and it wanted to differentiate itself and to specialize, specify itself into all sorts of different ways. But then as soon as it did that, now it got lonely and it got frustrated with all the division, all the limitation created. Now it has to reunify itself and get back to that original stew state. That's what death is. And then once you're dead, then you'll be bored of that, and then you'll come back and you'll incarnate as something else, some other creature. And then you'll get bored of that, and then you'll go back into the infinite stew, and then you'll come back out again. Actually, looking at the example of stars is really cool. I was talking about the sun earlier. So the sun will eventually release all of its gases. Or actually, no, let's redo that. How does a star even get born? The sun gets born by a bunch of diffuse gases and matter uniting together under gravity. Gravity is the force of reunion, literally. The physical force of reunion is gravity. It's really the physical equivalent of love. Matter reunites together, creates a giant ball of hot gas. That's the sun. These atoms, first it's very light atoms like hydrogen and lithium and so forth. They fuse together and create heavier atoms and heavier atoms and heavier atoms. So really what's happening, you might say, is that the molecules are basically having sex with each other and creating denser and denser molecules. And this whole thing is becoming this denser and denser ball of matter in the sun, until eventually the fusion becomes so dense, it's such a deep reunion that it explodes. And a bunch of this matter flies out throughout the universe, but also a bunch of it clumps together even further, creating a dense black hole. A black hole is like the ultimate culmination of reunion. And then this black hole now sucks stuff into it because it has so much gravity, it's so dense that even light can't escape it after a certain, after it passes the event horizon. And so that's just like sucking everything in as it becomes so dense. It's just like a black hole is basically the physical embodiment of love. Of course, the love is so deep it'll kill you, so don't come close. But that's what love does. See, if love is too strong, literally it kills you, which is why you're terrified of love. The ego is, because the ego is built on division. The ego is a division. It came out of unity. So the ego is always struggling to maintain its division from its environment. And reunion is what the ego calls death. But even the black hole, it doesn't stop there. The black hole doesn't just stay a black hole. There's actually something called Hawking radiation, which means that the black hole gradually radiates from like the north and south at the poles. It gradually radiates little particles, molecules, so that all the stuff and all the information particles that it sucks in eventually over millions and billions of years will all radiate out and the black hole will dissipate. So this is just an example of how a perfect reunion can't stay a reunion forever. It will divide itself again. And what about the Big Bang, our entire universe? As they say, it started out just a little tiny singularity, smaller than a mustard seed. That was all the matter in the universe. All the energy and matter in the universe was just this, like a little mustard seed. Including you and me, all of us were this little dot. And then what happened? It polarized, it exploded, it inflated. And then out of this came hundreds of different atoms, molecules, and things, quarks and leptons and protons and neutrons and electrons and whatever other kind of weird particles exist. All that came out of this. That was the process of polarization. From that came the planet, came the sun, different solar systems, came humans, came animals, all this stuff, human societies, all the technology we have today came from all that. That was the process of polarization. And then what's going to happen, and what's happening now, is that eventually the whole thing is going to start to approach heat death. The universe will cool down and cool down. Everything will kind of equalize into that infinite stew until it becomes a totally indistinguishable unity. And notice, when it becomes a total indistinguishable unity, you might say, well, so then how does the universe restart? Because if it started as a little dot and now it blows up and spreads out and just becomes totally flat and even, then that's it. It seems like the universe just kind of exhausted itself and it was just this one bang and that's it. But here's the trick that many scientists and others don't understand, is that if this thing flattens out into a completely indistinct, massive, infinitely flat object, that infinitely flat, indistinguishable thing is indistinguishable from the singularity from which it originated. So literally, the end is the beginning, therefore creating a perfect strange loop such that when the universe ends, it will just be the beginning of the next universe. That's one possibility. I'm not sure that that's exactly what will happen. Scientists are still debating about whether there's going to be an infinite expansion and a total heat death, or whether the universe, because, the space-time can be curved in different ways, the universe might expand out to a certain point and then it'll start to contract back in. But if that happens, that also leads to the same result, because if it does start to what's called do the big crunch, it goes out, expands, then it starts to crunch back together. Eventually, it'll all merge back together into the one little tiny singularity. That will be the complete reunion of all energy and matter. And then once that happens, of course, it'll blow up again, and the whole thing will begin anew. But really, there's not much of a difference between whether it does the big crunch or it does what's called the big rip. The big rip just means that it expands out forever and just becomes completely indistinct. Because either way, 0 and infinity are identical. The beginning and the end are identical. It's a perfect loop, reality is. And so if you have a singularity, just imagine it this way. If you take a circle and you collapse it down to a point with 0 dimension, that point, as soon as it literally has 0 dimension, it also simultaneously expands out and has infinite radius. 0 radius and infinite radius are actually identical. This is what a lot of scientists don't understand. See, that's one of the benefits of understanding non-duality. Then you can understand this stuff, and then you can do better cosmology and better physics and so forth. And finally, I'd like to point out to you what entropy is. Entropy, maybe you heard of this. This is a physical concept which is traditionally defined as a measure of disorder or order. Depends on whether you say there's high entropy or low entropy. So usually high entropy means a lot of disorder. Low entropy means a lot of order. But scientists don't quite fully understand what this is. They treat it mathematically, but what does entropy really mean? Entropy is just a measure of unity or division. Because unity is just the inverse of division, and division is just the inverse of unity. And so entropy usually is called like chaos. It's a measure of chaos. So high entropy means that a system is very disordered. And like in a high entropy system, you can't have life, for example, because life depends on order. Basically a lot of randomness. But that's not really what entropy is. Entropy is not chaos or disorder. High entropy is unity. Total unity. A lack of distinction, a lack of division, where you can't tell anything apart. Total unity is God or love as an absolute. It's absolute truth. That's what we're trying to reach with awakening, is to realize total unity. You might say it's that state of the singularity before the Big Bang. And then low entropy, and what life is really all about, is about division. So entropy is a concept from thermodynamics that basically tells us how all of life unfolds, how all of physics unfolds, how molecules spread themselves throughout the universe. And so, of course, all that molecules are doing is they are moving towards greater and greater levels of unity. And this drives everything. This drives your air conditioning. This drives your car. This drives the sun. This drives your metabolism of your body. Everything is driven by heat and by fluctuations in entropy, basically. See, to have motion at all, the only way we can have motion is through a division, because you need to create one position here and one position here. That means there needs to be a difference between positions. And only now can we have a sense of motion. And then to actually fuel that motion with energy, there needs to be an energy gradient. There needs to be high energy here, low energy here, and there needs to be some sort of like path that goes from high energy to low energy so that they equalize out. But after they completely equalize out, if all positions and all energies equalize throughout the whole universe and there's no differences and distinctions between anything anymore, literally we're in total unity. And so, of course, in total unity, in total non-duality, in total oneness, you can't have anything distinct. You can't have anything specific. You can't have any forms. You can't have any motion. There isn't a sense of time. If you want those things, if you want motion division space, time, you have to divide consciousness. And that's the key that science doesn't understand yet, is that science thinks these are physical processes that are happening randomly, accidentally, for whatever unknown reasons. That's not what's really happening. What's really happening is that this is consciousness subdividing itself intelligently, on purpose, by design, so that it could experience itself as God and as love. This is what God is. So what science doesn't understand is that science is in the business of studying God. It's just that science is always looking at God through a little magnifying glass. So it's always looking too narrow to actually see the entirety of God. Because to see the entirety of God, you need to completely zoom out. You got to take off your glasses and all of your microscopes and telescopes. You got to completely zoom out. And then you see God. And then you can zoom in and you can see individual aspects and parts of God, facets of God, of which there is an infinite amount of them. See? But that's what science is doing, but it doesn't know that it's doing this because it's too siloed and it's not holistic enough to realize this yet. It's not conscious enough yet. This is a meta-scientific discovery because science itself is a division within consciousness. So the reason science can't understand the ultimate nature of consciousness is because science is just a small part of consciousness, whereas consciousness is the totality. You can't grasp the totality with the part. Science is in the business of dividing consciousness, whereas to grasp what consciousness is, you need to be in the business of unifying consciousness. And that is where mysticism and meditation and yoga come into play. In fact, yoga literally means, in Sanskrit, union. Union. The union of all things, and especially subject and object, perceiver and perceived, life and death, matter and energy, mind and body. That's the business of yoga. See, and if scientists actually did some serious yoga, they would understand this, but they don't. But they will in the future, so we're getting there. We're getting there. See, here's an interesting little thought experiment. Let's say we take a container, just a glass box, and we put two gases in it, and we put a glass sheet or barrier between the two so that we have two gases that are different. Now they're divided. What's going to happen over time? Over time, this glass barrier is going to decay. Little holes are going to form. It's going to rot. It might take thousands of years, but eventually the glass barrier will decay. The seals in the barrier will have to break down. And when that happens, these two gases will start to mix together until they're completely mixed and you just have one uniform container. And if we wait long enough, even the outside of the container will all dissolve and decay and unify. And if we wait really, really long, all of it will just become one unified, indistinguishable stew. An infinite stew of particles, perfectly even. That would be the highest entropy. That would be perfect unity. See? And this is the natural tendency of all systems. Take any sort of ordered system. Like you could build a statue, you could build a house, you could build a car, you could, build a snowman outdoors. And then just leave it there and see what happens. Build a skyscraper, leave it there for 1,000 years, see what happens. It's going to all crumble and collapse. All the order is going to, all the division that you did to maintain that, it's all going to break down and it's all going to unify. So what does life have to do to fight against that? See, if you're interested in maintaining a certain shape or structure, like let's say you build a snowman and you really want that snowman to keep being a snowman for longer than a few days, what needs to happen? You need to give that program, that snowman some programming instructions, which allow it to move in its environment in such a way that maintains its snowman shape. You're going to have to tell that snowman to avoid the sun during the day, hide under a tree, or maybe go live inside a refrigerator for a while, then maybe come back out in the wintertime. During the summertime, you got to hibernate, otherwise you'll die. You got to program the snowman with fear. Fear of the sun, fear of the summer, fear of stoves, fear of anything that will melt that snowman. See? And if you do that, then that snowman might live for longer than a few days. Maybe it'll live for a week, maybe for a month, maybe for a year, maybe for 100 years. But eventually it will die, it will melt, and once it does melt, it will unify with its surroundings, and it will become infinite love. See, the snowman came from love, and it returns back to love. Just like you. It's really crucial to appreciate that unification comes with costs and benefits. It's not an absolute good. Even the ultimate unification of death comes with costs and benefits. So when you fully merge into infinite love, what's the cost? The benefit is that you're in total peace, you're in infinite bliss, and there's no more problems. There's no more survival. There's no more worry. You don't have to worry about sex. You don't have to worry about money. You don't have to worry about any of the human stuff you've worried about. And you're perfectly at peace and happy. But the downside is that you're totally indistinct. You're not any particular way. You're no way whatsoever. You're nothing. The downside of that is that you can't enjoy an ice cream cone. You can't know what vanilla tastes like. You can't enjoy sex. You can't know what another human being is. You can't enjoy having a cat or a dog because you literally are merged with the cat and the dog. You are the vanilla. You are the sex. You are every possible thing merged into one thing. See? So if you want to know what vanilla tastes like, you have to incarnate as a human. If you want to know what sex is, you need to divide yourself into male and female so that you could reunite and have sex. If you want to know what war is, you have to divide yourself into two rival tribes and then go kill each other. If you want to know what death is, you have to have life. If you want to know what reunion feels like, you have to divide yourself. See, if you're totally reunited, you're so reunited that you don't even have a way to tell what it feels like to be fully united. You're so united that there's not even a difference or a distinction between unity and division. See? So if you want to know what it feels like to reunite, you have to divide. If you want to know what it feels like to become God, you have to create the illusion of not being God. That's a very real trade-off. That's the only problem with God, is that God is nothing and so totally indistinct that it can't even really know itself. Because even the process of knowing oneself requires there to be a knower and a known, because knowledge is a dualistic, divisive enterprise or pursuit. God can't really know itself because it is itself. God can only know itself through a limited incarnation. And then, of course, all knowledge of God becomes limited because it's divisive. Knowledge by its very nature is divisive. And then people wonder, well, why can't I know God? Why doesn't God reveal itself to me? Because God is nothing. God is completely indistinct. How can God reveal itself to you when the nature of God is lack of distinction? To ask God to reveal itself to you is to ask God to limit itself for you. See, that's a problem. Because if God showed up to you in the form of Jesus, or if God showed up to you in the form of Ganesha, or God showed up to you in whatever form, a bearded man in the clouds, whatever, you would think, oh my God, that's what God is. It's that shape. But that's not what God is. Ultimately, God is totally indistinct. It's nothing, you see. But humans are constantly confused by this because God does reveal itself and make itself known to humans through various mystical visions and so forth. And then people get hung up on that and they say, oh, well, God looks like an elephant. God looks like a bearded man. God looks like Jesus. God looks like the Mother Mary. God looks like something else. But that's just one manifestation of God. Actually, God is totally infinite and indistinct, which means you can't grasp it. You can't define it. You can't say it's like this. You can't draw a picture of it. See? Which is why the Muslims are smart not to draw pictures of God, of Allah, and of Muhammad. They do that because to draw any picture of Allah would be to diminish Allah. To be true to Allah, you got to leave Allah undrawn. But then the scientists and atheists, they make the mistake of thinking that, oh, well, if you can't draw God, that means that God doesn't exist. No. You're just not understanding the situation. People often resist unification, and they sometimes hold unification as oppression. But oftentimes unification only happens through great pressure. Oftentimes reunification requires war, death, cruelty, torture, murder, rape. Exercise of power. That's part of the totality of what's going on. To understand this helps you to come to peace with all the evil that happens in the world, because really all the evil that happens in the world is often just pressure to reunify. It's reunification happening in a sort of twisted, perverted way. You see, like, ultimately Hitler was acting out of love with what he was doing. His master plan was based on love. But don't get me wrong, it was very problematic in the sense that the way he was going about it was delusional, because he was trying to create a unified culture or a society by conquering others. He was literally trying to reunify the world through division, which is insanity. See, literally insanity when you try to do that. But at the same time, he sort of succeeded, because after World War II led to the higher union of a European Union. I don't think people would have been down for a European Union had there not been 50 million lives lost in World War II. The lives lost in World War II is what was necessary to wake people up to the idea that, okay, we need to unify. See, that's the deeper intelligence of everything that's happening. I want you to notice that even in all the evil stuff that is supposedly happening around the world, all of it ultimately has a deeper intelligence. You just aren't conscious of it because you're not looking at it with a wide enough perspective. Now, you might say that, well, Leo, you're just justifying evil now. But what you don't understand is that there is no such thing as evil. There's only love. There's only intelligence. But from your little egotistical perspective, it certainly seems like there's evil, and it certainly threatens you that it seems like what I'm telling you is some sort of justification for evil. It's not at all. I'm not talking about justifying or rationalizing anything. I'm talking about how God works. It's not about justifying behaviors. It's about understanding the structure of all of reality and why it unfolds exactly as it unfolds. The fundamental rule of reality is this, that all divided entities will reunite and all unified entities will divide. Another fundamental rule of reality is that no one part can gain a monopoly over the whole. Because the whole is unlimited and every part is limited. The limited will never conquer the unlimited no matter how hard it tries, so it's futile. All such efforts will fail. Right now, the human species has been gaining a monopoly on this planet. But this cannot last. Eventually, the human species will not be able to maintain a monopoly on this planet. So, it's important to keep that in mind so that we stay humble and don't turn into massive devils. See, ultimately, what God is doing with its infinite intelligence is that it's seeking to maximize diversity of form, because that's what it is. That's what infinity is. It's diversity of form. It's the maximum possible diversity of form. So what God is it's the ultimate unity through diversity. Diversity is not the opposite of unity. It is the very definition of unity. In the same way that in mathematics, if we take the natural number line from 0 to infinity, see, infinity doesn't mean some very large number at the very end of that line. That's not what infinity means. Infinity means all the numbers endlessly forever, together, but also distinct. So infinity is not a single digit out in the future somewhere on this number line. Infinity is 0 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 all at once. That's infinity. Infinity is not a number. See? But even that is way too limited, because here we're talking about infinity in the natural numbers only. But actual infinity, absolute infinity, what God is the infinity of all possible forms, not just numbers. See? It's the ultimate unity of all diversity. And why does God want diversity? Because that is the expression of what it is. It's pure, infinite creative potential. See, nothing gives God greater joy, so to speak, than expressing its own true nature. In the same way that, like, if you're a great singer, nothing gives you more joy than singing for other people. If you're a great musician, nothing gives you more pleasure than playing the violin, let's say, or piano for other people. But if you're infinite creative intelligence and pure potential, if you're infinity, nothing gives you more joy than to spawn infinite diversity and to share that with who? Who are you going to share it with? Yourself. Because there's nothing but you. You're one. When you're infinite, you're one. So you can't share your own self with anyone but yourself. So what you do is you separate yourself, fragment yourself into a million different pieces, and then you share the joy of God with all those pieces by having them reunite and recreate you. And this process goes on forever. And that's what reality is. And that's what your life is. Ta-da! And evolution is not just a biological process. It doesn't happen through random mutations. Evolution is a universal process of differentiation and reunion. Evolution is driven by love. and by intelligence. And the key to evolution is maintaining this delicate balance, intricate balance, infinitely intricate balance between division and unity. If you get too much division, you get hell. If you get too much unity, you get hell. You need something in between. And there's no simple rules for how to balance this. It has to actually unfold. Beware of ideologues who hold division or unity as absolute goods. Or beware of people who make a duality out of division and unity, as though these two are separate things. They're not separate things. There are really two types of unity. There's unity with a lowercase u, and there's unity with a uppercase u. Unity as an absolute versus unity as relative. Relative unity is the unity which is opposite of division. Absolute unity is the realization that actually the division between unity and division itself is relative, and that therefore all of it is included into one single whole. See, unity with a capital U is a unity which includes infinite division. And in fact, there cannot be a unity unless there is division. Because how can things be united unless division is included in the unity? You see, if God was to exclude division from itself, then it wouldn't be total. It wouldn't be a true unity. A true unity necessitates its own division. To be infinite requires that infinity includes finiteness. In the same way that, look, to have infinity on the number line, we can't exclude the number 1 or 0 or 2 or 3 or anything. Infinity on the number line includes all the numbers. As soon as you exclude one number, it's no longer infinity. See? The mistake people make is they think that infinity is something separate from the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, it includes all those, and then it goes on forever. It's endless. It's very important that you don't cling to division or to unity too much, but that you appreciate the importance and interplay between the two, sort of like the yin and the yang. They're both necessary and important, beautiful and valuable. And also to realize that both are impermanent. See my episode called Understanding Impermanence, where I talk about this. So there you have it. Life and reality is one giant fractal of infinite consciousness. This fractal is God, this fractal is you, this fractal is love, this fractal is division, and it is unity. Your birth was a division, and your death will be a reunion, and everything that happens in between will just be variations on that theme, and nothing else can happen in reality. Because reality is nothing but differences and distinctions imagined by infinite mind, and then unimagined by infinite mind. By unimagining a distinction, you just reunite what was distinct. And the two were never really distinct. All of it was just one unity with an uppercase U. Over the next week, I'd like you to do this homework assignment, which is simply to walk around and notice how every object and situation around you is an example of, in some way, division and unity. The car you drive, the dog you have, the children you have, the spouse you interact with, the stuff you see on the evening news, what's going on in politics or in the economy. When you open your closet in the morning and you look at which clothes to put on, notice how all of this is variations on division and unity. And the more you do that, the more you will start to appreciate the wonder and magic of life. And the more all of it will start to make sense. And the more appropriate your behaviors and reactions will be to what's going on around you. See? Notice how you yourself and everything your mind is doing is also intimately related with this process of unity and division. How your mind is constantly dividing the world and then also reuniting the world by listening to teachings like this one. All right, that's it. I'm done here. Please click that like button for me and come check out Actualized.org. That's my website. You can find the book list. You can find my blog. You can find the Life Purpose course, other resources I'll be releasing in the future. The forum is there. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, you can do that by finding a link down below. Actualized. No, it's patreon.com/actualized. If you'd like to support this work so that I can release more content in the future and maybe do a little bit of advertising, have a little bit of a budget for that, I appreciate those who support me. And the last thing I'll tell you is, isn't it nice to be able to understand what the hell is going on in life? Like, I want you to just appreciate how powerful understanding is. Just understanding. Not necessarily something changes in your life, but just the very fact that you understand something at a high enough level. That's a big deal. That changes you. It changes how you look at the world, and it will certainly change your behaviors and attitudes in the future as well. Actualized.org from the very beginning has been, one of its highest values has been holism. I want this to be a meta teaching, a teaching of all possible teachings, sort of a grand theory of everything, even though, of course, a theory of everything isn't really possible because everything is not a theory. For that, you need actual awakening. But still, there are some teachings, most teachings, which are very limited, very partial, locked into a little paradigm, whether it's science or religion or even yoga or mysticism, even teachings on non-duality. I hope you've noticed by now, if you've studied some of it, read some books, they tend to be very narrow and limited. They're not really holistic. They're not really interested in comparing multiple perspectives. Very few Enlightenment teachers really have a holistic understanding of enlightenment. They're usually coming at it from a very narrow tradition, one pathway that they came at it from, whether it was Hinduism, Buddhism, Zen, Advaita, yoga, Christianity, whatever. Maybe they got some awakening, but it's still limited. It's still limited. So one of my goals from the very beginning was to not do that, to not fall into that trap, to present a teaching that was truly holistic and that really took into account science, math, physics, evolution, religion, mysticism, psychology, sociology, and history and politics and all of it. Of course, one of the challenges or trade-offs of this endeavor is that it's very sprawling, right? It's not only is it wide, but it's also deep at the same time, which means that there's a lot more volume to it, which means there's a lot more to listen to. It takes a lot more time for you to understand it, but also it really is amazing when you're able to get this amount of breadth and depth in a teaching and in your understanding of reality. That's really the only reason I'm even passionate about shooting this material, is that I wouldn't do it if I had to just narrowly teach one teaching. The only reason I do it is because I'm passionate about the diversity of it, the breadth of it, and also the depth of it, to show you how enormous reality is, how enormous you are. See? To me, a small, narrow teaching isn't actually true or faithful to what the universe is, because the universe is not small and narrow. The universe is infinitely wide and infinitely deep, and so I feel that a teaching needs to reflect that, otherwise it's not really a true teaching. It's too limited and partial. Now, even though I say this, of course, my teachings are still limited and still partial. It's impossible to have an infinite teaching. But, it's a matter of degree. Some teachings are broader than others, some teachings are deeper than others, and some teachings are both broader and deeper than others. So if you like that stuff, then you're in the right place. We got more coming in the future, so stay tuned.